Right, so with Apple's 2021 Mac releases pretty much over, let's look into the future and delve into the 2022 Mac updates we should expect. But first, make sure to like and subscribe for the latest Apple news and rumors. And with that being said, let's just tuck in. Right, so beginning with the cheapest Mac, that is the M1 Mac Mini. Now, to be honest, I'm still unsure whether we're going to see an update to the low-end Mac Mini. You see, it makes sense to give this the M2 chip and maybe the new design we're going to see with the M1 Pro/Max Mac Mini. But of course, do remember the Mac Mini is going to be the only Mac that offers both the M1 chip and also the M1 Pro/Max chips. And so that means if we do see the M2 chip, it's going to be pretty confusing to many that the cheaper Mac Minis have an M2 chip, which of course to the average Joe is going to seem better than the M1 Pro/Max because 2 is a higher number than 1. And so for that reason, I could see Apple keeping around the M1 Mac Mini as it is alongside the higher end version. It's either that or Apple does not give us M1 Pro and M1 Max in the Mac Mini and instead just keeps M1 around and makes M2 the higher end chip. And this in a way could make sense because for the price, M2 in the higher end Mac Mini is still going to be an absolutely amazing deal. And of course, as some of you guys brought up, even in the Intel days, the Mac Mini did not have all the high-end chips. And so I do think there is a fair chance we just see M2 and no M1 Pro/M1 Max in the Mac Mini. Now, as for the other big upgrade with the Mac Mini in 2022, that's going to be the new design because John Prosser has already given us renders of these new Mac Minis and they're going to have plexiglass on the top that's going to give you better Bluetooth, and it's also going to get the same power connector we see on the 24-inch iMac. So yeah, pretty nice upgrades. Now, prices are a little hard to predict since of course we're still unsure whether we'll see the M2 chip or the M1 Pro/M1 Max, but I will say that you should see the same price structures we see right now. So the base model starts at $699, and of course the higher end version starts at $1,100. And as for the release, if we do see the M1 Pro/M1 Max chips, expect a spring release. If we see the M2 only, that means we should see a release alongside the M2 MacBook Air in June. And talking about the MacBook Air, let's move on to that because there are some pretty massive updates coming to this Mac. And that begins with a completely new design. So this is going to be a mix between the MacBook Pros and the 24-inch iMac. So that means we should see white bezels and the notch, which I'm not looking forward to. Now, I have explained my thoughts on this in the past, but basically I'm fine with the notch if we get black bezels. But white bezels with the notch is going to be an eyesore and it's going to stand out. And so yes, this I'm not looking forward to with these new MacBook Airs. Thankfully, the other rumoured upgrades are much better news because we're getting MagSafe back on the Air. This is pretty nice and should offer faster charging with these MacBooks. Now, as for the ports, we're not getting any of the legacy ports back. It's still going to be 2 Thunderbolt ports, but now they're going to be on each side of the Mac, which I very much welcome because now you should be able to charge your MacBook Air on either side. Now, as for other changes, we should see mini LED on these MacBooks, but no promotion like the Pros, and we should also see the M2 chip. Now this is going to have the same 4 power cores and 4 efficiency cores like we see on the M1, but the individual cores themselves should be A15 cores, which are slightly faster than the A14 cores we see in the M1. We should also see 10 GPU cores instead of the 8 we find on the M1. We should also get a 1080p FaceTime camera on the front, and also the full function row we see on the MacBook Pros. So yes, again, pretty massive updates. And as for the price, I'm sure it's going to see a similar price increase to the M1 Pro/M1 Max MacBook Pros. So that means around $1299 for the base version. And this would make sense because Mark Gurman has said we should see the base M1 version stay around in the lineup and so I do think Apple's going to keep that at the $999 price point. Now, of course, some of you guys might think that's not possible because we do have the base MacBook Pro at that $1299 price point right now, but do note, I'm sure the M1 MacBook Pro is going to be discontinued. It doesn't really have a space in the Mac lineup anymore, and to be honest, the MacBook Airs are completely fine for 98% of users, and so yes, we just don't need a base MacBook Pro anymore in the lineup. Anyways, coming back to the new MacBook Air, the release date should be mid-2022 according to many sources, and so that's heavily suggesting a WWDC release for this new MacBook. Anyways, let's now move on to the M1 Pro / M1 Max iMac. And this, to be honest, is a pretty straightforward upgrade. It's basically going to be a desktop version of the MacBook Pros. So that means we're going to see a 27-inch mini LED ProMotion display, the same M1 Pro and M1 Max configurations we see on those MacBooks. And as for the design, it should be very similar to the 24-inch iMac, but with black bezels and 2 color options, which should be space gray and silver. Price wise, I do think it's going to start at $2,000, much like the 14-inch MacBook Pro, and as for the release, Ross Young has already said it should be Q1, so that means a spring release at a potential March/April event. Now coming over to the last Mac, the Apple Silicon Mac Pro, this is going to be a pretty massive update and is going to be pushing the limits of Apple's potential with Apple Silicon. And so basically the configurations are going to be 2 M1 Max chips or 4 M1 Max chips. And so that means either 20 or 40 core CPU and also a 64 or 128 core GPU. So yeah, that undoubtedly is going to be a beast. Now design wise, it could resemble the G4 Cube and should be a lot smaller than the current Mac Pro because of course it's going to be losing the modularity we see with the current design. And as for the price, this I'm not too sure about because obviously Apple's saving a ton of money with Apple Silicon, and so in theory they could bring the price down. But then again, every single redesigned Apple Silicon Mac has either been the same price or gone up in price, and so I do think there's a fair chance the Mac Pro stays at around $6,000 for the base model. Anyways, that's about it for the 2022 Macs, but tell me in the comments below guys, which of these Macs are you most excited for? Anyways, thank you for watching guys, make sure to like and subscribe for the latest Apple news and rumours. Check out the video in the clip above on details regarding the iPhone SE 3, and on that note, I'll see you guys in the next one. See ya peeps!